Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. You watch it on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in. And don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. Also, for you Gold members, I am doing a private Zoom session just for you. Tuesday, 7:30 Eastern time. You should receive a link to join the Zoom session and go for about 30, 40 minutes. Ask me whatever question you want. I'll answer as best as I can. And then the rest of the club members will be able to get to see that after we're done with the private Zoom. Also, in a minute, I'll be joined by Nicki Jhabvala from the Washington Post. Now, we're going to talk about Dan Quinn's coaching staff, a lot about that, and then also some other topics through that are going to obviously be there for Washington throughout the offseason, including, of course, quarterback. As you may have heard, they may pick a quarterback with the second pick. I wonder if there's going to be any debate on any of the quarterbacks who might be up for possibilities. And I wonder if the debates will be rational. What do you think? I'm going to guess no. For most people, no, it won't be rational because we've already seen it. But that's the fun part of the draft and sports. So enjoy it, embrace it. And in a couple months, it'll be over. And then the whole debate will be, how good will this quarterback be? Anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Going to be joined by Nicki in a minute. And again, I want to bring Nicki on just to get her thoughts on Dan Quinn's coaching staff. We met with Cliff Kingsbury and Joe Witt Jr. last week. I gave you my thoughts. I think, Witt has the energy and passion I think is really good in a coach. But more than that, I like the message he gave about how he's going to teach the creative learning process. But also you can point to what they did in Dallas and his work with the secondary there as far as being able to disguise post or just kind of show a different coverage post snap. That's very key. So it's not just about, oh, he's got the energy. Oh, he's got this passion. He's also got the chops to back it up. And so I think that is as big as anything. Anyway, Kingsbury, he's a play caller. He's a play designer. You can tell that's what he wants to do. Anyways, I gave you my thoughts last week. So I wanted to get Nicki's thoughts and also on the entire staff in general. We're going to meet all the assistant coaches on Wednesday, later in the day. So I'll be talking about our impressions with them and just some things we gathered for the ensuing podcast as we start to now get more and more into the roster. I'm going to put this coaching stuff behind us. I'm going to have some people on coming up, hopefully, to talk about some of these coaches in particular, hopefully on Kingsbury, just to fill you in more on what the offense is, who might fit well within this offense. We know that there are multiple guys in this draft at the top of the draft that are good candidates for this offense. But I want to bring on people who can maybe have some stronger ideas about the fits, what are important things to look for, et cetera. So we're going to start to get more and more into that. We have free agency coming up in a couple of weeks. We have the combine coming up in a week. And so we're going to talk about that as well as we're going to get into all that. So there's a lot to discuss going forward, moving past some of the coaching staff stuff, because thankfully that part is over. It also means I don't know that I'm going to be doing a podcast every single day, probably 4 days a week, at least unless news warrants. So the next podcast that'll come out will be, and the YouTube portion will be on Wednesday morning. So unless something unforeseen happens on Monday night or Tuesday. Anyway, there you go. So the next one comes out Wednesday. Enough from me. Let's get to my conversation with the Washington Post, Nicki Jhabvala. Nicki, we got a chance to talk with Cliff Kingsbury and then Joe Witt Jr. on Thursday. We're taping this Friday, going to come out Monday, but I am curious. I gave people my thoughts on it, and I know they, wanted to jot down every word, but they kind of like to hear from you too. So there's a lot of Nick-ettes out there that love when you're on. So there you go.
Brainwash people.
But I am curious, but I do want to know your general thoughts, first of all, on what you heard from the coordinators.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it was a lot of the same things that you hear from folks when they come in. We're going to tailor the system to our guys, and we want, a collaborative approach and blah, blah, blah. But I do like some of the things I heard. I mean, Cliff kind of dodged all the questions about quarterback, which at this point I kind of understand. He came in 3 days ago. They're just beginning roster evaluations. There's not a whole lot they've done and I get his reasonings for not going deep on Caleb Williams. But I thought one of the answers he said was interesting, where he doesn't like the air raid label to his offense. And again, that could be total semantics. But if he's really saying that there will be more balance to his offense, especially with you look at some of the hires they've brought in and bringing in outside ideas to not just do the same thing they've done at past stops. I think that's a really sound approach. It's a good approach. You hope they actually do that. But I think it'll be interesting to kind of see what they come up with and if they actually do tailor it to their personnel. On defense, I think there's more of a track record of Dan Quinn and Joe Witt doing that, because the defense in Dallas was not the same as it was in Atlanta or Seattle, where they ran that, their signature cover 3. It was, it was more of a mix of man and zone, and they ran different things. They moved guys around. I think anybody really likes hearing, you want the quarterback to be confused post snap. I feel like most teams do that now, some better than others, but that was a common gripe among this group last year. So they didn't feel like they had, enough disguise. They didn't feel like, they felt like they were sort of predictable on defense. So I think adding these new layers and just having in fresh ideas, fresh voices will really help this group.
Well, I think let's stay on the fresh ideas, because to me, that's a distinct difference from what we saw the last several years. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's a hodgepodge of assistants. This is not a group that has worked together for years or even a year. Some have, but not all.
So and you kind of just talked about, but what do you have either concerns about, like, because you bring in a lot of ideas, or is that just, because to me, like with ideas, it can stimulate growth, energy, and all that. It can be a very good thing, but you have to make sure that people are actually listening and adapting.
Right. And that's kind of the feeling I came away with, is like, I think it's a good approach. I think you always want somebody to challenge your own thoughts. You don't want just everybody to agree. I think it's, some debate is healthy. To bring in new ideas to help your offense, defense evolve is essential. And Dan Quinn said that in his introductory presser. You also want to make sure you don't have too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, that you have a singular message, because that too was an issue last year and in years prior, where you'll have different messages from the assistants. What the head coach wants is not consistently passed down and relayed to the players clearly. So if you can ensure that, I think it's a good approach.
And I think that's a good point too. Like even last year, because I mean, there were assistants, but it's like it was a mixture of maybe what Ron wanted to do in some ways with what Del Rio had done. And it was really, a lot of it was Ron's staff, but you're the coordinator. So it was I don't know that it was always the best mix conducive to elevating a group. I mean, I think they all, people know football. I mean, they're smart guys. It wasn't about that, but I do wonder about that, and just how important it is to have guys who aren't just tethered to the head coach.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember one player saying, and it was sort of like you have a coordinator, but also a positional coach, like either a defensive pass game coordinator or positional coach. And it felt like they had two positional coaches that were teaching different things, and that's not good. They need to be in sync. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that there were a couple of times on defense too in the past, and this was more like this is several years ago, where maybe something would happen and the position coach and the coordinator were not on the same page about what they wanted to see, whether it was technique or whatever, and it led to confusing messages to the players. And then if the position coach doesn't stick up for the player, then it's even worse. So those are some of the conflicting messages. That's why they talk about same page. Right. And I think, I don't know that, Nicki, I'm not sure that they were all ever on that same page.
Yeah. It didn't seem like it at times, but this is where, and I've thought about this a lot. I've kind of gone back and forth on it. Like, I would have really loved to see Dan Quinn call plays, because I think he's really good at it, obviously. but more and more I see his reasoning for wanting to be purely focused on being sort of that manager, so to speak, which I think has gotten sort of a negative connotation over the
Mhm.
years. Um, but when you have all these people on staff, it's essential that they're all on the same page. And if you're torn on one side of the ball more than the other, then it's much more difficult to do that. And he said that he's kind of learned some lessons from the past when he's coached in Atlanta on feeling like he's been spread too thin. So listen, I applaud any coach that does something differently after not completely succeeding one time before, because I don't think every coach does that. This is not
Right.
the NFL by nature recycles a lot. Um, so it's kind of refreshing to hear a coach say that.
I also think clearly Joe Witt feels like he's ready for that ascension
Yeah.
to the role. And
Yes.
I would think that, like, I don't think that Quinn is going to do that if he doesn't feel that Joe Witt is ready for
Right.
that role too.
Right.
What were your takeaways from him?
Yeah, I thought he was really interesting. I mean, I came away super hyped from the press conference.
Well, I saw the way you decked Sam Fortier afterwards, like you leveled him to the ground. Like,
um, no, but he had some great one-liners. You know, the way that we live is not for everybody.
right,
Um, no, but I like, you know, a lot of the things that he was preaching are a lot of the things that this team sorely needs, you know. They've talked about creating takeaways, but it was never consistently done. It never felt like players were developed to get to that point where they could consistently force takeaways. You know, he talked about Micah Parsons and moving him around, and he felt like there are a couple guys on this roster where they could move him around and create different matchups. He talked about the post snap confusion. He talked about just, you know, how structure doesn't really matter. 3-4-4-3. I feel like that has kind of become a thing of the past anymore
right.
because more teams play in sub packages than they do in base anyway. But I think the fact that his messaging was the same as Dan Quinn's, that play style is more important than anything at this point, and finding that same sort of makeup is essential. I mean, you like hearing that coach and coordinator are on the same page. So
Yeah, and do you, when you listen to them, what I'm going to go? By the way, I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to answer the door, open the door for my dog to come to my office because it's sitting there crying. So I'm going to ask you the
oh,
question.
oh,
Don't be
you need
there.
to
You
do
go.
that.
So, but don't be like don't be distracted by me leaving my seat for a minute. But was there a player, and I'll be able to hear you? Was there a player or
Yeah.
two that you felt like needed to hear the Joe Witt message?
Um, I felt like there were a few. I think, well, all of them, but you know, I think the first one when you're talking about Micah Parsons, the first one that came to mind is Keim Curl, just because of his versatility. So you hope that they get a deal done with Keim Curl soon. Wow, that was speedy.
That's right there.
But you know, Jamin Davis is another. If they, you know, decide to keep him, you know, is really, because I felt like his first few years here, he has not developed into the player that you would expect as a first round pick at
Right.
linebacker. And he has some of the traits that Joe Witt described, but it was never consistent. And it never really felt like he got it, Jamin. I'm trying to think. Quan Martin, I think, will be great
Yeah, I
with
like
Joe
him.
Witt. I mean,
Yeah, perfect.
he's a physical player. He really started to come on late. He's a versatile player. Um, Derek Force is another very
Yes,
physical player. Could do more
violent.
with him. So, very violent. He should fit the Joe Witt mold. Um, but the guys up front, I mean, it's a defensive end is where, like, I mean, they need guys.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know who they're gonna be, but you know, they need more than just their interior guys.
Curious because the name you didn't bring up was Emmanuel Forbes. What do you think this means for him?
Yeah. I can only hope that it means he takes to the coaching, he learns, he becomes more sound with his technique. Because like for all the talk about his weight, after he was drafted, his weight was not the issue.
Correct.
It was his technique.
Correct.
And it was, you know, doing that technique consistently, which to me I think both player and coach are to be blamed. Like, as Joe Witt said, which I thought was fantastic, if a
Yeah.
player isn't learning, it's the coach's fault. You know, players can learn. It means you're not a good teacher as a coach. Um, and I agree with that. You know, I think it's also on the player to take to the coaching. So I think it's on both, you know, the DB's coaches and Emmanuel Forbes to really kind of fix some of the issues that were holding him back last season.
Right. And to me, it's like if you can't reach them, then you drafted the wrong player. So somewhere along the line, the
Right.
evaluation was wrong. But I agree with you. Like there's more, and what I liked from it, and I talked about this on the other day, was like there are multiple ways you can use to reach a guy. And sometimes it's, it's everybody learns differently. And that was kind of the
Right.
message that he had. He did have like a lot of energy too, and a lot of
Yes.
passion for that. How important do you think that is?
I think it's huge. I think just like it is with Dan Quinn. You know, this is a team that has like, you know, been mediocre at best for years. I mean, they haven't had a winning season in 7 years. One playoff berth. I mean, it's just, you know, they need somebody to kind of feel that energy. I mean, I just remember being in that locker room for much of the season because I feel like after the Bears game, everybody just felt like it was
That
done.
was it.
And then after that, it was like a dead zone. You know, there's no energy. And like it sounds corny just to talk about energy and because it's not all about rah-rah. It's just a simple belief that you feel like
Right.
you can still win. And to have a coaching staff that believes that, I think it's absolutely necessary. Um, especially after last year, and this is no knock against Ron Rivera. Every coach has their own style. Um, but there was a point where it felt like some of the coaches were not quite in it too. And players see that. Of course,
They do.
players feed off that. Um, so to have that energy, I think it's essential, but it's also really refreshing, you know, just to have that belief. And yes, this is always the happiest time of year in the NFL.
Right.
Everybody thinks they can be a contender, but they and I don't know how this will pan out. I don't want to like say like, oh yeah, they're gonna be great. Like I have no idea. But I think some of the things they've said and some of the things they plan to do seem to fit what this team needs.
Well, it's funny you bring that up too, because like in the locker room, I think the other word is hope. And when you have
Yes.
hope, you have energy. It brings
Yeah.
its own energy. I think after a while, they lost hope. They lost
Yeah.
belief that they were going in. John Allen voiced it, but I think we
Yep.
felt it from many others that they kind of realized this is who they are. And I think there was a shock
Right.
to the system after that Bears game and some of the couple other games where like they did not expect that kind of a result.
Right.
And
Right.
so I think, but yes, I think with energy comes hope, but it can't be false energy. And I think energy not just comes from like it's not just about rah rah. It's about how do
Yeah.
you attack a situation? Like, how are you solving problems? Right. It's not just like, hey, I'm here. Like we've all seen guys that come across like they have energy, but they can also
Right.
insert a lot of
It needs to be genuine.
negativity and negative
Yeah.
energy into it too. So I
Yeah.
think that, but it comes from a belief, an upbeat confidence that I think you can get. So how do yeah,
Ultimately comes down to winning too. Like,
well,
you know,
ultimately,
I
yeah,
felt like there was a lot of belief early in the season. This like we don't have to go into like the Bieniemy stuff, but I felt like players were much more accepting of some of the ways early on because they were
yeah,
seeing the results in training camp. They could see they were in the best shape of their lives after training camp. You
mhm,
know, they could see some improvement. But when you don't get the results, it's hard to keep that energy. It's hard to keep that
sure,
hope. So, and I think that's on players too to kind of
yep,
understand kind of they're in the middle of a rebuild, and I'm going to call it a rebuild because all the words mean the same. Um, but you know, it may not happen overnight, but if they can see incremental improvement, I think that's essential too.
yeah, and I think you're right, and that's one thing talk to people because again, I'm like you. I think the off season for them is off to a really good start.
Yeah.
And that's all it is a really good start. And it doesn't mean like, I don't know that they have the roster to then go, boom, here it comes.
Right. Right.
And I think when you talk to people who've been in this game a while, like it can be I don't want to say a slow build, because this fan base has watched slow builds that go nowhere.
Right.
You've got to show improvement. You've got to show, not to me, Nicki, it's not just showing improvement. Also, who are you? I don't think we ever saw that. Like, I don't think we saw that enough. And I think when you create that identity, then you understand who you are and where you're trying to get to.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And
And to me, like I look at the Houston Texans, and not everybody can do that, and that's largely a credit to CJ Stroud, and he's an exceptional talent, and you just don't find those every day. You like to think that they have a very good chance with the number 2 pick, but it's hardly a guarantee. But you look at where they were 2 years ago to, what they achieved last season, and it's remarkable. And that would be amazing if Washington could do that. It would take a perfect storm, as it does with every team. But it's not impossible.
no, it's not impossible. And it shouldn't be accepted that you're not going to improve a certain level. But I do think you need to show, you need to see the tangible impact of that improvement, right? And just like, are you headed in the right direction? Because I think, again, I go back to the John Allen stuff. He just stopped believing they were going in the right direction. And when players see that, like early on, you can see, okay, new coach, like, yeah, you're not winning, but you're seeing this, and it's going to pay off here, here, and here. Cause like, that's how it was, honestly, the first year with Ron. There were like, I know one reason Ryan Kerrigan didn't want to leave, because he felt like he wanted to be a part of, he felt like it was turning around, and then it didn't. And so like, as long as you see that growth, and it doesn't mean you can't win, though. You're right. Has there been an intriguing hire to you of all these assistants that they've compiled?
I mean, I think Anthony Lynn is really intriguing, and I think everybody kind of looks to just his experience as a head coach, which of course adds to it. But I just think everything he's done in the run game. I mean, he's a running back himself. He has 2 Super Bowl rings.
Yeah.
I think that is really intriguing, especially when being paired with Kingsbury and whatever he wants to call his offense, which has been mostly air raid. I refuse to adhere to these. I don't want to be labeled this or that, whatever. I think that's really intriguing, especially given where this team was last year with, they're practically non-existent run game. And I say that just in like, it didn't exist, that the coaches really called it, but when they did, the players were very efficient. Like, they have the talent. So I think that's really intriguing to see what he does there. I'm also intrigued by Daryl Tapp, the defensive line coach. Just, we saw what the 49ers defensive line looked like. And granted, they have incredible talent there. Not everybody has a line that's built like that. But the way they play seems to fall in line with some of the things that Witt says, that Dan Quinn says. And, it's a very physical, aggressive defensive line. So, I'm curious to see what he can do. And he's stepping into it like a first year, full-time positional coach. He was an assistant D-line coach with the 49ers. So those are the two that really intrigue me.
By the way, I do know a team that used to have that kind of talent on the D-line. So, but I do.
I heard they also had talent on the offensive line too, not too long ago. It's weird.
It's been a while, but you're right with the D line though too, because even Witt said, "Hey, listen, he's a secondary guy, but he always knows like it starts up front." But that's where like the whole coverage stuff. I love that stuff. Watching how you disguise a coverage to throw off the quarterback, and there have been times here, like not this past year, but the year before, where I felt like they did that pretty well, and it made a difference. And they were horrible at that last year. And so some of that was coaching, some of that was player, but it was a mixture. And so I think if you can solve that, but what I like is he understands it starts up front. So, cause like they're going to have some decision to make up there. Like, how do you attack that? Do you go out and sign? Like they need 2 ends. Do you sign 2 free agent ends? Do you draft one? What would be your approach?
I think you need a veteran in there for sure. I am curious if they re-sign either or both Casey Toohill or James Smith-Williams to like 1 year just to have the depth, because they don't have much there. But I also think it's imperative that you draft a guy. Now they have drafted guys in the past, but they weren't plug and play guys. And I'm not even sure they're ready this year to really step up. I thought KJ Henry, I thought he had some really good plays, but he didn't get enough time consistently to really know, like, where's he at? Could he really step in? And I still think you need you need a guy there on the edge. You do. Like you have to have at least one good defensive end in this
Right,
league, in my mind. Especially when you don't really have any linebackers.
right.
um, so yeah, I think this draft will probably be one of the most important drafts for them. And we say this every year, but like, if they have the number 2 pick, you figure they go quarterback there. They really need a defense to back them up. They need a line so badly. They got to develop an offensive line in the draft. It's just they got a lot of work to do. And
They
to me, it's if you don't start building this in the draft, then 4 years down the road, you're gonna have nothing.
Well, and that's why I think what I liked in the initial press conference, and how many times have you heard we're going to build through the draft? Everybody
And,
says
and
that.
yeah, everybody says it, and they never do it.
Or you don't evaluate well enough, or you miss on guys,
Right.
or whatever the reasoning is.
Right.
And I think that's one thing, like San Francisco had enough really good, like you're not going to hit every year. You're just not. Like,
Right.
When Scott McLuhan came here, he had 5 years of track record. Well, a couple of those drafts were horrendous, but 3
Right.
of them were really good. And it helped
Right.
build a good team. So, and even, with the Niners, they had some years where you got a lot of starters out of that draft. And other years, maybe you only get 1 or 2, but you build it all, but a lot of it's homegrown, and then you can supplement. So, but I like that philosophy. Can you pull it off? And I think that's why Peters has a rep for doing that. But your first pick is the number 2 pick overall. You need a quarterback. You got a couple sitting there. You better get it right.
Yeah. And it's
No
not like next
pressure,
year's
Adam.
class is really, it's not touted nearly as much. But yeah, I mean, I look at like Detroit's line, the line Dallas had for years.
Yeah.
These are all built through the draft. It has always, I will never stress this enough because it always amazes me that there are these examples across the league. And for the NFL, a copycat league, we all know that, doesn't follow this model consistently. Now, I understand you're not going to find these great linemen, but you have to try to get them and develop them. And it just, watching this team kind of decimate a really good offensive line and never invest or develop their offensive line it's astounding.
I think the key is developing, because I think the good team like Callahan is a master at doing that. And there are other lines, and I think scheme can help that. But I also think you have to have something has to be right.
Yes.
And you can't punt on a lot. And not punting on it, but like you've got to get that right. And I think that's one of the things here. Like, can you develop that? Did they, Bobby Johnson was in New York. Did he develop those guys there? I think there's some question marks there. But, do you go out and get a couple of vets, which I think you're going to need to? So
Yes.
Last thing, Nicki, did you take anything out of the quarterback conversation? The only thing that Kingsbury said, you need a guy who can be mobile.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing I took out of it is he would like to have Patrick Mahomes, which
That's right.
great. Every team would love to have Patrick Mahomes. Glad we established that. But yeah, I mean, he's not the type of guy that's going to reveal much, obviously. But I think what they have to do in the draft is pretty clear. When you need a quarterback and you're sitting at 1 or 2, there's not a lot of surprises there. Like
No.
you got to take one.
No,
So,
and listen, if Sam Howell develops under them, that's even better. But you
even
can't just
better.
rely. You can't just rely on that. And
Yeah, quarterbacks are worth their weight in gold. And the backup is, in my mind, the second most important position on the team, because especially here, the backup usually ends up being the starter by week 7. So, you need a good one.
yes, so there you go, Nicki. Always appreciate your time. I've got to go now take care of a gas furnace that is no longer working, and our downstairs is not getting much heat.
Oh my
So I got to go
gosh.
take care of that. And then a roof that
For
needs to be
me, with
replaced.
I fried my forehead with
Okay.
flat iron. So good times.
Well, there you go.
Really
Now
going
we got two people who need to do things. So thanks a lot, Nicki.
Going well. All right. See ya.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Nicki for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. I'll be back on Wednesday morning with another episode. So I'll talk to you next time.